Welcome to the first video tutorial of the process of creating custom lakes for the Pishtech game VR Sportfishing. In this first segment, we're going to cover the basics of what defines a lake, what specifies a lake for the game, and how you go about creating your own. One of the very first things you're going to need to do is set up a new user in the game called Lake Tester. You're going to use that to test everything you do in the lake. So we're going to be using that a little later on, but keep in mind anytime you're testing out a new lake, Lake Tester is the user you want to use for that. We'll get into a lot of cool things you can do with the Lake Tester profile. But first, some general prerequisites, things you need to be able to do to create custom lakes for VR Sportfishing. First of all, you have to own the game. The free demo version does not support custom lakes. This does require the full version. Next, you need to have some sort of image editor that you have some skills with. That could be Photoshop, it could be any kind of image editor that gives you fairly advanced features like masking, things like that. And if you need a good image editor, there's a lot of options out there. There are even some very good free ones. I use Picture Publisher by Micrographics. The company is no longer around, but it's a pretty powerful program, and you can still pick it up on eBay fairly cheap. Alright, so we're just going to start with some basics. What defines a lake for VR sport fishing? Well, a lake is defined, first of all, with a text file. Here's a text file called lakedefmaster.txt, and you can edit this file in any text editor. Notepad works just fine. For every new lake you create, you're going to make a copy of this file and save it with the name ending in .lak. That lake extension tells the game this defines a lake. We're going to save a copy of this one and call it new lake.lak. When you see the save as type here, text file, change that to all files. Otherwise, if you're using Notepad, it will make it newlake.lake.txt, and that won't work for the game. It's got to end in LAK. So we're going to save the file. Now up here, it's newlake.lake. Alright, this file is pretty straightforward. There's a bunch of text parameters here, and they're grouped based on category. And a lot of them you could just absolutely leave alone if you want, but we're going to cover them all just very briefly right now. So first of all, general parameters. Here you see what is the name of the lake as it will appear in the game. Name it anything you want. Again, this is how it will look in the game. When you name your file, it's a good idea that you name it something much more specific, like maybe your initials. Mine would be PJH _ Gull Lake, if that's the lake I want to create. This way, it will avoid any confusion with other possible files on your system or other people creating other lakes. So make it unique to you, make it unique to your lake. But up here, this is just the name as it will appear in the game. The map size, all the original games lakes, the ones that came with the original version, they're all a 6,000 foot by 6,000 foot map, a little over a square mile. If you want to go to a bigger size map, you can. Some of the newer ones are larger than that, but the bigger you make it, the more processing time it's going to take to load the game for people, the more computing power it's going to take to do a really good job of handling that large lake. So have fun with it, but don't get carried away. 6,000, you can have a pretty complicated and good-sized lake with smaller lakes and bays connected to it in 6,000 feet. If you want to double that, go to 12,000. That's not too bad. But again, just keep it reasonable. Okay. Next is the name of your grayscale bitmap. This is your height field. This file defines the height of your landscape. Best bet is 1024 by 1024 or smaller, but a grayscale image has to be a grayscale bitmap. I'm going to pop up Picture Publisher right here. Here's an example of the one of the western lakes in the game, Canyon Lake. And as you can see, it's white at the highest points of the ground of the landscape, black at the lowest, and it fades from black through the different colors of gray for different levels of height. You can see this particular lake has a lot of terraces. It has areas that are sort of blotchy with the same shade. That all depends on the landscape you want. But that's what we're talking about for your height field map. Again, 1024 by 1024 is a good size. And again, it's not an RGB image. It is a grayscale image, which means the palette, if it's a saved palette, it goes from black to white. There's no colors of gray. All right, that's very important. Make it a grayscale image. All right, back to the text file here, landscape height factor. This is really the height from the lowest level at the bottom of your lake to the highest point in the landscape. That can range from, at 1.0, if we enter 1.0 here, that's really a 255-foot height range. If you want a huge mountainous environment with towering peaks over a really deep lake, you might set this as high as 10. So now you're talking about 2,550 feet of vertical range from your highest peak to your lowest pit. All right, your approximate latitude of the lake and longitude, that helps the game understand what the seasons are going to be like there and predict the weather, the water temperature. How many trees do you want on the shore? A normal level is usually around 1. It will automatically put them in places that are reasonable, in other words, not excessively steep. It will put pine trees on steeper land than deciduous trees, but overall, just pick your level of how many trees you want. Again, don't get carried away. Too many trees will slow the game down for most people's computers. You want to design the lake that will work for a lot of people. All right, what percentage of your trees are pine? 0 to 100. The original lakes in the game had no pine at all. They were all deciduous. If you want to make your trees larger than normal or smaller, you could make scrubby little bushes instead of trees by reducing the size, or you could turn your pine trees here into redwoods by increasing, instead of 1.0, set it to 2. Now they're massive, massive trees. What's the minimum altitude of the trees above the water level? You can adjust that if you want. Generally, the default here is 10 feet, so you just don't have any trees growing right against the water, but up the bank a little ways. You need to pick a spot in your lake where you're going to have a bait shop. The default, and it's fine to start out with this, just leave it defaulted, is 3,000, 3,000. So with a 6,000-foot map, these coordinates drop the bait shop right in the middle of the lake. It's fine. The game will automatically raise the land around it and make a little island there if necessary, or lower if you happen to be in the middle of a mountain. It will set it to around the water level, even it out, and put the bait shop and dock there. Once you actually get your lake going in the game, then you can pick a more appropriate location for the game, and we'll get into that in a later tutorial. But to start with, you need to have a valid location that is on your map somewhere. A lake texture file. This is an overall texture that represents what the lake would look like from the sky without showing the water. Here, remember, this is again Canyon Lake from the original game. Here is its, I'll zoom out a little bit. Here's its overall texture file. This gives the lake built-in lighting, so you've got shadows on the steep edges, also different, there's not a lot of variety on this one because, if I zoom in a little, because there aren't a lot of land types. This is a desert environment, but you see there's some rockier areas, there's some kind of desert grass, and there's some sand bottom. So this will give your lake a lot of depth as far as the appearance of depth of field when you're viewing your lake within the game. Having a good overall texture will do a lot for your landscape. All right, but again, that single image is stretched over your entire landscape, and if that's a square mile, every pixel of that image, and it can be 1024 by 1024, again, that's a good guideline. This is a color image, but every pixel may represent 100 yards square, so you're not going to get a lot of detail from that. Detail comes from splatting layers. That's layers drawn over the landscape that can be semi-transparent and show grass or rock or sand and mud and things like that in much greater detail. That's what you see up close. But from the larger distance, the overall landscape is more important. Again, we're going to get into that in a later one of these tutorials. Okay. Again, just going through this file, water altitude, water clarity. You can change these things. It's, again, fairly self-explanatory. But this is the text file, so you're going to want to edit this. Every time you change it, the game is going to automatically do some reprocessing of, it's going to generate a landscape structure map. It's going to figure out what shorelines are, what islands are, and points and bays and all that. So we're going to go through all these other parameters later, but for starters, that's step one. Create your new lake file, .lak, create your height field, and we will come back to the next step in the next tutorial.